without any delay, let's get started. So in today's class, as I mentioned, we are going to start with CSS, right? CSS, cascading style sheets. So, but before we dive into CSS, I know some of you might have one or two questions. I would suggest that whenever you come across anything in programming or regardless, so the first thing you should try to do is to Google search, right? So first of all, if you don't understand anything, try to Google search. So for instance, now someone asked me, what is the meaning of BDO, right? So now let's say BDO in HTML. So this is an example of how you can Google search the meaning. So essentially, so what this means is that you can override how a text is displayed. For instance, now we all know that in English language, so we start from the left to the right, from the left to the right. But for example, if you are writing in Arabic, it starts from the right to the left. So now what you can do now is when you use BDO, you want to override how the text is meant to be displayed. For instance, now if you write BDO, you now say right to left, which means that this text will be displayed right to left, which means this is going to be displayed from the right to the left. That is, the right is full stop followed by letter T. As you can see, the right is full stop followed by letter T, and so on. So that's an example. So BDO means bidirectional override. So you override how a text is meant to be displayed. So now, like I mentioned, the assignment I gave, it was that we should try as much as possible to go through all the HTML tags. Like I mentioned, we have different HTML attributes and the likes. But I would like to call your attention to some that you might have come across. So for instance, now one of the things I want you to note is div. So if you see, I click on div. So a lot of the time when you go through HTML file or HTML document, you are going to come across div, div. So as mentioned here, this div is basically used to put a set of things together in a container. My name is so. Can you see now that the content I have here is saying my name is so. Now let's put this stuff in div. Let's see what happens. Div, and also the closing tag. Without the div and with the div, there is no difference. So you have to know that some HTML tag, they don't add any change to what you've written. They don't add any change to the text. Why? So the main reason why we may need this div, is that sometimes we may want to only style this part. Your HTML page, you have the first page, the first part is navigation, the second part is say the about the company, the third part is the third part is what the company does, the services of the company. So sometimes you may want to give a particular style to nav alone. Sometimes you may want to give a particular style to about alone and services. So that's why sometimes you would need some tags that they don't really add anything to your HTML. They don't add any change to them, but they are just a way of saying, okay, this is a particular part of the code, and this is a particular part of the code. So that is about div. So now another one is section. So another tag is section. I'm not sure if I can locate that here, but you might have come across section before. So section is also another tag. So section is also another HTML tag. For instance, section, right? So you can also say section. The closing tag is section. So like I mentioned, the way div work is similar to how section works. So section also, it doesn't add any change to your HTML file. You are just using this tag to group similar things together. Based on what I explained earlier, you can have a section which is for navigation. You can have another section which is for let's say about on the same page. So this makes it easy for you to, let's say you want to locate anything on the page. So those are some of the things you may come across when you are dealing with HTML. There are several, like I mentioned, there are several HTML tags available. So now let's move on to CSS. We've touched on HTML and how it works. So CSS, which means CSS stands for cascading style sheets. So this CSS, you use it to style your HTML page. In the previous class, we wrote some basic HTML. So, and this is the style. So now, what I have done now is to comment out the style. I'm going to save this document, then I'm going to open it. So I'm going to locate the file. The file is located on desktop. Then on desktop, we have TechSavia. Where is TechSavia? So this is TechSavia front end introduction. So now the name of the file is index.html. So I'm going to open this index.html, open with Firefox, which is a browser. So as you can see now, this HTML file does not look good. So you use CSS to style your HTML, to give it color, to make it more attractive. It says that CSS is a styling language used to describe the presentation of a document written in HTML or XML. So essentially, you make use of CSS to style your web page. So let's say, for instance, you want to give it a particular layout, colors, So on this W3 school as well, so just click on CSS. So now on the CSS, so now the first thing is this. There are up to 3 ways you can make use of CSS. There are 3 ways. Before you can style your HTML file, you need CSS. Now, how do we write CSS? I'm now saying that there are 3 ways you can make use of CSS. The first way is what we call inline CSS. You can be jotting down this inline CSS. I hope my spelling is correct. Inline CSS. So that is the first way of styling HTML. And also we have what we call external CSS. External CSS. So I'm going to explain each of these methods one by one now. The first way you can style HTML is inline CSS. So before we move on, let's take a look if we can see 3 ways to style CSS. On this W3 schools, I'm going to send you this link as well. This link, you need to check it out so you can know how to style CSS. Sorry, how to style HTML. So there are 3 ways to add CSS to your HTML. The first way is external, the second way is internal, and the third way is inline CSS. So now let's start with the most simplest way to style your HTML is what we call inline CSS. So the meaning of inline CSS is that you are going to style your web page, or you are going to style your HTML by styling the HTML tag directly. For instance, now you know that this tag is h6. If you want to give this tag a particular tag, you have to write the style immediately after the tag. So this means that this is where your style is going to locate. This means that your style will be located immediately after the tag. In our case, let's say for instance we want to style h6. So if you want to style h6, you just need to say style, then you need to say equals, style equals, then whatsoever style you want to give to h6, you are going to write it here. So let's say for instance we want to say color. The color of this h6 should be red. Let's say the color should be red, for instance. The meaning of that is that if we come to our page, this contact us, the color we want to give to it is going to be red. Now let's go back here. Remember that contact us, the tag for contact us is h6. So immediately I save this document. Let's save this document and let's see what happens if I reload the page. If you take a look at my document now, h2, this is h2. The ending tag is meant to be h2, but there was a mistake here. The ending tag is h. So for it to work as expected, we need to use the right closing tag. The closing tag here is meant to be h2. Now let's save this document again. Let's reload the document. As you can see now, we've been able to style our HTML page. So the way we are able to style our HTML page, or the way we are able to style our HTML, is what we call inline CSS. Inline CSS means that you want to style HTML by writing the style immediately after the tag. That is, you are writing the CSS in line, that is in line with the HTML. Please, is that understood? Before so if I would know if I should repeat myself. Okay, so now that is understood, right? So we understand the meaning of inline CSS. Inline CSS means that you want to style a particular tag and you are going to write the style for it inside the tag. Remember that every style I wrote for h2 before the closing tag. When I say the closing tag, I mean this right angle. Note that I've only used h2 to explain. You can style whatsoever you like. So now let's remove the style from h2. So now you can style, like I mentioned, you can style whatsoever you like, whatsoever you want to style. So let's say, for instance, you want to style this div. You want to style this div, and you put the style in this div. So now note that this style you've applied is going to be what? Is going to apply for everything before closing what? The tag, before closing the div. If you notice, this is the start of the div and this is the end of the div tag. So if you put your style here, your style is going to apply for everything in between the div. So now let's save this document again. Let's save it. Ctrl S. Now let's go back to reload our page. Reload the page. If you notice, everything, everything we have here, they are in between the div. That's why they have the color to be red. So now I've only done here is just color. Color is not the only thing you can style. I mean, there are several lot of things. There are several lot of styles you can apply. Let's say for instance now that I want this div to be a container. So now you are going to understand what I mean now. Let's say I'm going to say the background color for this guy should be, let's say the background color is black, for instance. So you can see that we have so many attributes. So what you've written on the left hand side is called attribute. So the background color attribute, the value for it is black. So now let's say color for instance, the attribute is color and the value for the color is what you write after it. Let's say it's red. So now let's say for instance we want to give this div tag, we want to make it like a container. So another attribute you can use is what we call radius. Let's say border. So now let's say border radius. Let's say I give it 10 pixel. Let's save this document and let's see what happens. So if you notice, I believe you can now see a kind of like a container right now. If you notice, what I have done here is that I have applied inline CSS to this div. I have applied inline CSS to this div, which means that this div should have background color of what? Of black, which is why everything, the background is black. And I also mentioned that border radius should be 10 pixels. Border radius means how curved the container is meant to be. So now in our case now, you can see now that if, let's say I put it to be say 20 pixel. 20 pixel. Let's save it. Now let's see what happens. Can you see now the radius has changed? So this is how you can use inline CSS. So you see what I've only demonstrated here is just like a tip of the iceberg. There are so many CSS attributes you can apply. So there are so many CSS attributes you can apply. So for instance now, if you come here, so for instance we have CSS selectors. So before we even come here, do you understand the meaning of inline CSS? So I will know if I should proceed or I should re-explain something I've explained. Okay. So, does everyone understand what has been explained about inline CSS? Okay, so up till now, do you have any question before I proceed? So now let's proceed. So now, remember, what I explained here is what we call inline CSS. So that is one way of styling your web page. That is, you put the style right after the HTML tag. So now, the second way of styling your HTML tag is what we call internal CSS. So what is internal CSS? Right? Internal CSS means that both your HTML file and your CSS file are going to be located in the same document. Again, internal CSS means that both your HTML file and CSS file, or your CSS, your styling sheet, is going to be located in the same file with HTML. Let me explain what I mean. So now I'm going to comment out this style. Let's remove this side. Let's reload the HTML file. Can you see now this? We are now back to the previous design. So now what we want to do now is this. What is internal CSS? Like I mentioned, internal CSS means that your CSS is going to be located in your HTML file. So now, for you to do that, there is a particular tag in HTML. We call it style. So now, if some of you might be wondering that I am having autocomplete. So now, so what I'm using is a VS Code extension. There's a particular extension I'm using. So in case you also you like this autocomplete, which means if you type something, you can press enter, so that it saves your time. So now, like I mentioned, internal CSS means that your CSS file is going to be in the same. Your CSS file is going to be in your HTML file. So now, for you to do that, you need to use this particular tag called style. So now, within this style, you can now write what? You can write the style for your documents, the style for your HTML. So now let's take for example. Let's take for example that this so now at this point, you need to know that before you can style anything, you need to know the document. So you need to know how to select an element from HTML. For instance, now you can't just be writing style here. Let's say I write background color. Background color color, let's say equals, the value is red. You can't just be writing your style here. So before you can write your style, you need to say, okay, I want to style a particular element in the HTML file. So first of all, you need to mention the HTML element you want to style. So in our case now, let's say for instance, we want to style H2. Remember, we intend to style H2. So what you are going to do now is that in your style tag, you are going to mention H2. Did you see what I do? You are going to style H2. Okay, maybe what I can do so that you can visualize this is, let's use the guide on W3 schools. We have external, we have internal, then we have inline. So I've already discussed inline CSS. As you can see my screen now, this is what I explained earlier. Inline CSS and inline CSL and inline style may be used to apply a unique style for a single element, which means that if you want to apply a single style to H1, you just need to write the style in the tag. If you want to style the paragraph with a particular color or with a particular style, you need to write the style in the paragraph, in the tag, in the HTML tag. So that's about inline. So now let's talk about internal CSS. In internal CSS, what you are going to do, the internal style is defined inside the style element. So now you understand that for you to use internal CSS, you need the style tag or the style element, which is what we've written here. What we've written here is the style element, or this particular tag called style. This means every style you want to write every style you want to apply for this document, you need to write them in this style. So now let's go back. So the first thing you need to mention when you want to style, when you want to use internal CSS, is to mention the tag, is to mention the element you want to style. For instance, now, like I mentioned, the first thing here is that we want to style H2. So you need to mention H2. You need to say H2. So immediately you mention H2, you need to use you now need to use open and close curly braces. So this, did you see what I wrote here? Open and close curly braces. So this means that every style you want to apply for H2, you now need to write it in between the curly braces. So now let's try it out. Let's say our H2, we want to give it a color of, let's say we want to give it a color of, let's say color. As you can see, this is just for you to know that there are so many attributes, style attributes you can use. See, when I type CO, as you can see, it is showing me a lot of attributes you can use. Can you see? Let's say I write BAC. So it's showing me a lot of things. Let's say you want to use background color, background image, background position. So now, as a student of knowledge, what you are meant to do after each of the classes is to know more about each of these attributes. So you don't just say, okay, what is taught in the class. You don't just limit yourself to what has been taught in the class. You need to research about, okay, how can I incorporate each of these tags into my style or into my project. So now let's move on. Let's say color. So now we want to give this guy a color of, let's say, blue. So now let's say blue. The meaning of this is that every H2 tag that is detected in this HTML file, the color must be blue. Again, the meaning of this is that every H2 tag that is detected in this HTML file, you want to give it the color of blue. So this is just a single attribute. Of course, you can use as many design or as many style or as many attributes as you want. Let's say I want to say text. Let's say I want to say text There's what we call text design. It's a text decoration. We have, let's say, line through. So now, note something now. But first of all, let's try to save this document. Ctrl S. We are going to save this document. Now, let's go back to our page. Let's reload the page. What do you see? You see that every H2 tag now has a color of blue. Now, like I mentioned, you can use as many styles as possible. So now let's say we comment out, let's uncomment this part. Now let's save it again. Let's reload the page. So what do you see? Can you now see that because we apply a color, or sorry, because we apply a style of line through on it, we applied a style of line through to H2. It has now been applied to the H2. So let's say there are so many, let's say, like I mentioned, there are so many attributes we can use. So let's say, for instance, you want, there are a lot, but that is why we don't just want you to say you are learning, or you are say cramming the tags alone. That's why in the upcoming class, I'm going to, by God's grace, I'm going to showcase the project we want to build. So you know, when I do a demo of that project for you, so part of the assignment will be that you would have to build some of the pages for the project. So it won't just be that you are learning and you are not practicalizing. But before you can start practicalizing it, the foundation needs to be there. So you understand? You have to know HTML, you have to know CSS, you know, the basics. So now, that is that about internal CSS. Now we understand the meaning of internal CSS. So that is about internal CSS. If you take a look at the screen, in this example, they are styling the body. They are styling what? The body itself. So now let's take a look. Let's copy what we have here. The meaning of that is that let's comment out this part, which is the previous design or the previous style. Now let's use another tag called body. So the meaning of this is that, Ctrl S. The meaning of this is that this everything found in the body should have a background of linen. I don't know how to pronounce the color. Anyhow, no, so I'm saving the document. Now let's reload the page. So now, as you can see now, the body or the background color of the web page has changed. Can you see now? The background or color of the web page has changed, because remember, the content of your web page should be inside the body. This is the body. This is the opening tag of body, and this is the closing tag of body. So now you are now saying that I want to apply a style, this style, to the body. So now that's just one of the ways we can style. So like I mentioned, we have so many ways. Let's say you want to apply a style to paragraph. You just need to say paragraph P. Remember that we have an HTML. We have HTML tag of paragraph. I'm not sure if we have a paragraph in this. Sorry, I'm not sure we have paragraph. But let me search if we have paragraph. P. So we don't have paragraph. So now what I'm going to do now is this. So let's say for every paragraph, we want to apply the color to be, let's say the color to be red. Let's save the document. Reload the page. So what is this? So now that's because we've removed the color for the background. So now, if you notice now, there is no red. There is no red color here. That is because the paragraph tag cannot be found in our HTML. So now, what I want to do now is this. I'm going to create paragraph here. A paragraph. Let's say hit the submit button below. So now let's save the document. I'm going to save the document. Let's go back to our page. Reload. So as you can see now, we didn't have the paragraph tag before, but now that we have it in our HTML, we can now style it as we want. So far so good. What we've discussed is how we can style tag. how we can style, yes, how we can style tag. That is, we can pick a particular tag and style it. So I mean, in as much you can define a tag in HTML, you can style it in CSS. For instance, if we want to style the div, we need to mention div. We want to style the form, we need to mention form, and so on. So now, before I move on to the next one, I want to know if you have any question or what I've explained. Do you understand? Okay, so now please move on with your question.
Okay, so I don't know the inline styling and internal styling. When we come to background, like, will it give us the same results? Like, I don't know if you understand my question, sir.
Yeah. So
like the two of them give us the same results. Like, can we just, instead of like using the inline, the internal, we can just use inline styling, or there's a difference? Like there's just something that this one gives that this one doesn't give.
They do the same.
I don't know if you
thing.
get me.
I understand your question, Ima. So the two styling approach, inline CSS and internal CSS, they do exactly the same thing. You understand? So it's sometimes
Yes.
it's a matter of choice, and sometimes as your project gets larger, we are still going to get to that. As your project gets larger, you may not even want to use inline or inline CSS or internal CSS. But now the goal is that you can differentiate between the two. You know, okay, this is inline CSS and this is internal CSS. So regardless, they do the same thing. So if you apply the style the same way, they are going to look exactly the same thing. You understand? So one thing I should also mention before we proceed is that if you are using if you are using internal CSS, the style tag must come before what? Must come in the head. If you notice now, the style comes before the body of the document, before the HTML file. It is very important that's why one of the things you need to put in the head tag of your HTML is style. That is, if you want to go with internal CSS, make sure that your style comes in the head, not putting, of course, let's practicalize something now. So now remember that I want to do something now. So okay, so let's do this. Okay, so let's do this. I want to comment out some of these styles. So now let's do this. Okay, let's comment out this guy here. Okay, I also like to format so it looks good. Format document. So now I formatted the. So now don't mind the way I am. So one thing you can always do is to format your document. I mean, you can format your code. So if you just need to press Ctrl A to highlight everything. Right click, then format document. So once you format your document, it makes it more readable. As you can see now, H2, body, paragraph, they are now more readable. Now, as I was saying, make sure that your style comes in the head. So now let's save this document. Now I want to show you something, but we may not really know the difference because this is a small if you notice in my example now, the style, I have removed the style from the head. Now I put it in what? I put it after the body, after the HTML file. Let's see if I can show you something here. Reload the page. So well, we may not notice the difference. So one thing you should know about HTML is that it loads from the top to the bottom. So it is always advisable that your style loads before the HTML file. So that's why sometimes if you visit some websites, I don't know if any one of you has experienced it before. You would visit a website and when the website is loading, it will look ugly. First of all, it will look ugly. Then at some point, it will look okay. It will look good. Some of the mistakes, sometimes, some of the mistakes might be that they are loading the page before the style. So if you load the page before the style, the page would have been loaded. So it means that you may not see the correct style until it loads the style. So that's why I mentioned that HTML or most coding or most code, they load from the top to the bottom. So imagine now you've loaded the page and the page is already looking ugly before you now load the style. So you don't want to do that. What you want to do is to put your style in the head tag. So immediately your web page loads, it loads the style. Right? Is that understood? So now I think we have a couple of minutes. I want to quickly explain something before we move on. So okay, I'm not sure if we can actually do before we move to external CSS. There is something I am meant to explain. So now, so far so good, we've known how to select HTML tag, right? From what? From CSS, H2, body, paragraph. But I want to tell you that is not the only way we can what? We can reference HTML tag from style. So this is what I mean. So now, in this case, you are going to come across what we call something. I want to write something down. So we call something. So this is what I'm going to do. We call something class and what? And ID. Note this down. Another way you can reference HTML from CSS is by using the class and the ID. So that's why sometimes if you are reading through HTML document, you will see something like class. It has meaning. Class, as you can see now, we have something called class here. So I can decide to say ID equals, let's say special ID. You can give it any name you like, special ID. So now, remember the initial way of referencing HTML from CSS is by mentioning the tag. I'm now telling you that mentioning the name of the tag, div, h2, paragraph, is not the only way. The other way you can use is what we call class, and there is a benefit in using class. So now let's imagine that we want to duplicate this part of the code. This is div, right? This is the first part of the code. Now let's duplicate it. Let's want to write another one below. So now, if you notice now, we now have two div. We have the first div, the second div. So now, remember that if you come to your HTML, if you come to your CSS and you say div, div, if you apply this style to div, every div document will be affected. So now let's try out an example. I'm going to comment out this style. Let me comment out this style. Color, background color. Let's say the background color should be let's copy this color. Now let me comment out this part of the code. So now let's do div. The meaning of this is that every div tag that is found in this document will be affected. Let's save the document. Now let's reload the page. Where is the page? So if you notice now, every div tag is affected, but sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes you don't want that. So that's why you can make use of what we call class. So class is another way. You can say, let's say for instance, this class, you can say first container 1. This is just an example. First container 1. I'm going to give this one first container 2. Did you see what I've done here? The first one, the class is just a way of differentiating different parts of your code so that you can easily style them later. So now what we've done here is to give this first part class a particular class, the second one a particular class. So now once you've mentioned the name of the class, so now this is the name of the class. the first name, the name of the class is from container 1. So now what you want to do is this. How do you now reference class in what? In style. So first of all, you need to use dot. Then you need to do this. So this means dot is referencing dot means that you are referencing a class, and the name of the class is this name. So now let's copy this color we have here. Let's copy it. Let's put it here. Now let's save the document. Let's save the document. Let's see what happens. So did you see now that because we only referenced this container, it is only this part it is affecting. This is not affecting the other div. So that's why I mentioned to you that another way of styling your HTML is not just limited. I mean, the way you style your HTML is not limited to you mentioning tag. No, you can make use of, say, class. So this is one way, the class, right? So this is one way, the class. As you can see now, I've mentioned the class. So when I mention the class, this second class is not affected, but I can give them the same tag. So if I do this now, this is going to affect every class from container 1. This means that these two div or these two classes will be affected. So now let's save the document again. Now let's reload. As you can see now, both of them are now have a color of blue. So that is about using class. Please, do you understand? We have a few minutes more. We have 4 minutes more. So now, that is about using class. Another way we can style is by using the ID. So let's say, for instance, you can also use the ID. Like I mentioned, the ID we have, let's say, special ID 1, special ID 2, right? So now the ID is special ID 1. So now, if you want to make use of ID, instead of using dot, you don't make use of dot. You use what we call tag. So, am I correct? So now let's do this. So now we make use of tag instead of using this. So now let's save this. So special ID 1, which means only this part is expected to be styled. Let's go back. So it works, which means we can make use of let's say special ID 2. If we use special ID 2, the meaning is that only the second part will be affected. Let's save the document. Now let's go back. So that's it. So far so good. In this class, you've been introduced into to, say, CSS. I'm looking for the W. So in this class, you've been introduced to CSS, inline CSS, and also inline CSS, internal CSS. What we haven't touched. Also, we discussed how you can make use of class and ID to style your document. So now, do you have any question? I'm not sure if we can. If I wish, it depends on your availability. I would like that we conclude on CSS, so that next in the upcoming week we want to start working on our projects. So now, before I move on, do you have any question? If you have any questions, signify. So now we don't have any question, but I would like to ask you that do you still have up to 20 minutes so that we can wrap up on the external CSS? So I want to know all your opinions. So yeah, can we proceed? So someone said 10 minutes. Okay, do we all agree? All right, so now quick one. Let me start with internal, external CSS. So now, what is external CSS? So now, like I mentioned to you, there are several ways you can style your HTML file. We have internal, we have external, we have inline. So now, but the honest truth is that as your progress gets larger, it will be so cumbersome. It will be difficult for you to manage your styles, writing all your. Imagine Imagine that your HTML file alone is up to 400 lines of code. So far so good. Now we have almost 135, say 136 lines. So let's say we have 136 lines. Sometimes you might have up to 400 lines. This is just a login page, for instance. We have 400 lines of code. So that is just HTML alone. Imagine you are now writing CSS also in this document. So to be honest, as your project gets larger, what you would want to do is to have a separate file for your what? For your CSS. Instead of writing it inline, or writing it internal, you want to have external style for your CSS. As I was saying, we have external CSS. We've discussed inline CSS, which is you writing CSS inline, that is in line with the HTML tag. We also have internal CSS, which is you writing CSS in the same file as your what? HTML. But remember, whenever you are using internal CSS, your style should be up. It should be before your HTML file. So now we are in external CSS. From the word external, external CSS means that your HTML file and your CSS file are located entirely different in different locations. So external CSS means that your CSS file is not with your what? With your HTML file. So now, and I mentioned some of the benefits of using external CSS. As your project gets longer, it will be so difficult for you to be writing CSS and HTML in the same file. So what you want to do is to have separate files for them, so you can easily manage your files. So now let's go back to W3 Schools. So where are we on W3 Schools? Now we have what we call external CSS. So according to W3 Schools, how do we write external CSS? Well, it is simple. So external CSS means that you want to reference what? You want to reference your CSS file inside. You want to mention the location. External CSS means that you want to mention the location of your CSS file. You just want to mention it inside your HTML. Your CSS file, your CSS code is not in your HTML. So now let's take a look at some examples. Take a look at what we have here. What they have done here is that in the head tag of the HTML, in the head tag, can you see what they do? They write, there's a particular tag called link. They mention link, and they say that the type of link is style sheet, which means you want to use this link for styling. And the next thing you want to mention is href, that is, where is the location of this CSS file. Now let's practicalize this. I'm going to copy this guy we have here. Let's copy it. Now we've copied it. We've copied it. So now I'm going to comment out. Remember that we have what we call inline CSS. We have inline CSS before. What I'm going to do, just to make things clean, I'm going to remove this inline CSS. Let's remove this inline CSS. I have removed the inline CSS we have. So now I'm going to copy this link. That is the text I copied from W3 Schools. So now the meaning of this is that you are linking what? You are linking your CSS file with your HTML file. You are saying that the link, you need to use essentially you need to copy what I've copied here. The only thing you need to change is the location. You are saying that the link, the CSS you want to use for the HTML, this is the location. This is the location. The location is style.css, my style.css. So now, before we do that, what we are going to do now is to create this file. We are going to create it. That is my style.css in VS Code. So new file. So first of all, let me copy the text. in VS Code, click on this icon to create a new file, then write the name, mystyle.css. So now this is CSS file. Remember, when we start writing HTML, the extension name must be .html. When you start writing CSS, the extension name must be .css. Whatsoever name you've given to your style sheet, it must end with .css. The same way for JavaScript. If you are writing JavaScript, it must end with .js. So now, what we intend to write into this file is CSS. So now, what do? So now, for us to write CSS, so like we mentioned, the first thing we need to do is to what? Is to link the document, that is the CSS file. Now, within the CSS file, we are now free to start writing CSS in the file. So first of all, I want to style this part of the code, which is, let's say I want to style H2. But before we start styling, I want to delete the second part. I'm going to delete the second part. Now let's go back to our HTML file, reload the page. So now we can see that this is a blank HTML. I mean, it doesn't have any color, it doesn't have any style. So now let's start styling. Let's start styling the document. Now in my style, I want to style. Someone asked a question. Let me see. Is there any question from someone? Okay, so don't mind. So now I want to start styling the HTML. As usual, what you need to mention is the tag. Remember, I told you that whenever you want to style anything, you first need to mention what do you want to style. What do you want to style? Is it div? Is it H2? You need to mention the name of the tag you want to style. If you are not styling by tag, then you might want to style by class, or you might want to style by ID. Let's say, for instance, we want to style by H2. Contact us. So first of all, you need to mention H2, the name of the tag. Then you need to say open and close bracket. This bracket, they call it curly braces. It's not square bracket. This is square brackets. No, we are not making use of square brackets. We are making use of curly braces. So first, you want to say the color you want to give to this guy should be, say, red. So I mean, we can easily know. We can easily dictate red. So you want to say the background color. You may want to say the color decoration. Sorry, text decoration. Text decoration. So there are so many stuffs we have here. Text decoration, as you can see, we have dashed, we have dotted, double. So let's say we want to use dashed text. Let's say dashed. Now let's save the document. Let's save the document and to see what happens. So as you can see now, this stuff, it affects the style affects our HTML. Let's say line through. We can easily dictate line through. Let's reload the page. So now it means that we now have what we call external CSS, because the style sheet, our style, is not written in our HTML file. I hope you now understand external CSS, inline CSS, and internal CSS. But I want to tell you that so now let's practicalize something now. It is possible for you to combine the styles together. What I mean by combining styles together is that you can be using what? External CSS, internal CSS, and inline CSS. But in my case, I'm going to combine external CSS and inline CSS. So now let's practicalize something. Remember, we say that the style for the H2 should be red. Now let's do something interesting here. Let's come to our H2 here, and we're not going to say style. So let's say style, and the style, let's say the color should be blue. So now I have a question here. Which one do you think is going to, I mean, did I say which one is going to override another? Which one is going to override the other one? So in our case now, I'm asking the question that which one is going to be applied to H2? Is it the one coming from external CSS or the one coming from inline? Do you have an idea?
I think inline.
Inline, yeah.
Okay, so okay, some of you are saying inline. Do you have a reason for choosing inline? Why not external?
I feel like because inline is like directly placed with the HTML.
Okay.
Like is the proximity between the inline and the HTML is very small compared to the external.
Okay. The other person, do you have a reason for that?
Okay, I think that the code will read the inline first, since it's there, like from up. You said it reads from up to down.
Okay.
So I think to read it first before it goes, because that one is external, is somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
If the code is going to read, I'm not sure the code is going to read the inline first. Remember, we mentioned that HTML runs from the top to the bottom, which means if at all, the one that is going to be first read is the external, because remember, HTML is reading from the top to the bottom. Then when it gets here, it will have read the CSS, the external one, before even getting here. So to be honest,
yes,
I think what should yeah. So I think what is yeah. I think what should the answer is probably blue. I mean, we haven't tested it. I my own reason, if I'm going to choose an answer, I'm going to choose blue. Why? Because we know that CSS runs, HTML, it runs from the top to the bottom. This one, by the time you get to this line, this guy has loaded, right? But when it gets here, this one is just going to override what has already been used in the CSS. So now let's try it out, blue or red. So I think the answer should be blue. Now let's reload the page. Let's see what happens. So as you can see now, the color is blue, right? So someone is raising their hand. So the same applies to whether you are using internal CSS. Remember, internal CSS will be on top. Even if you are using internal, so let's take a look. If you are using internal CSS, let's say we are not using external CSS. If you are reading internal CSS, the internal CSS would have loaded, and by the time it gets to this side, it will just override. So you understand. So that's why the answer is blue. So now you understand. So now let's say, for instance, let's remove this guy, the blue color. Hopefully we should have the red. Yeah, it works. So that's that. I hope you now understand the difference between line CSS, internal CSS, and external CSS. Like I mentioned, note that you can use if you want to style anything, you can use the tag you want. Remember, some of the tag we haven't really used, for instance, is let's say is section. I can put a comment here, section. So some of the tag, I just want you to familiarize yourself with some of these tags. We have section, we have span. So some of these, for instance, this span, you use it to give style to a particular section. Sorry, to a particular I'll call it section. I don't think I have any other word to use. You use it to give style to a particular section. Let's say, for instance, let's say I want to say my name is, let's say, is Ray, or my name is Ridwan. So now let's say Ridwan. Imagine that I only want to style this part of the code. Let's say span, and this part is span. So sometimes you may only want to style a particular part. In this case now, I only want to style Ridwan. So which means I can easily apply my style to here. So which means only this part will be affected. Let's say for instance, my name is, you want to bold in this style. So those are some of the styles. So that's why I said the more you work with projects, the more you get better. So make sure you are not just, like I mentioned, it is always good to set the foundations. You understand? So you need to know, so you need to know, even once we start the projects, I'm still going to give you some key points about CSS that you need to know if you really want to be able to convert any screen. Because you see, any website you visit, the first whenever you are doing software development, the first part of software development is some of the steps. So should I say software development life cycle? Before you even get to the point of, say, let's say TechSavia.org, before you get to the point of writing code, there are some people, they call them UI UX designer. What they do is that they don't code. Actually, what they do is to design websites. They don't write code, but they use some softwares like, say, Figma, Adobe XD, Photoshop, any design software. They use that software to design something similar to this, but it is just design. They just designs. So you, as a front-end engineer, you are the one that is going to convert those designs. They call them screens. You are the one that is going to convert the screens into what? Into websites. So that's why you really need to know CSS very well, because without HTML, CSS, believe me, you can't convert any screen to you can't convert screens to HTML, to web page rather. So that's it. If you take a look now, so this part, for instance, TechSavia, this part alone can be a section. We can put all these parts into a section so that we can easily style them alone. You can put this part to be a section so that you can easily style them, and so on, more and so on. So that's how it works. So now, like I mentioned, just in case I forget, please remind me some of the things, but I don't want you to focus on that for now. Some of the things, in case I forget, some of the things you might want to know about CSS. You need to go deeper into CSS. It's what they call something Flexbox, Grid. But like I mentioned, please don't focus on that for now. Flexbox, Grid, responsive design, you can note down this in case I forget. Responsive designs. So these are some of the things, but I don't want you to bother yourself with this for now. So now we understand inline CSS, internal CSS, and external CSS. I believe we are good for now. So I think we are good for now. If you have any question, I would like to attend to those questions. Please, if you have any question, you can signify.
Just type my question in the comment section, please. Okay, so the question is, no. Okay, so it says, which is now the best of them all? Inline, internal, external, and which is the best for combination? See, one thing about software development is that sometimes there's no one way of doing things. You understand? Because generally, to be honest, if you are working on a project, a larger project, I will always advise you to stick with external CSS. You don't want imagine you have your HTML file to be it's going up to, say, 1,000 lines, and you still want to put your CSS file in the same file. So whenever you are working with a large project, I highly recommend that you use external CSS so you can focus solely on them. For instance, now you might want to use it. So let's say for instance now, let's take a look at this website, for example. So now let's say, imagine that you are using a single HTML and CSS, for instance. It's a single HTML and CSS. Imagine that tomorrow you now want to change the style of, instead of this guy being blue, you want to change it to red. You know where you have to go? You have to go into a HTML file. So it means you have to be navigating between HTML and CSS. It can be difficult. Why not just go to a file that you know that it's only CSS that it contains, and you already know probably this kind of things. You can give it a style of, say, you can give it, say, home, let's say home color or something like that. Second, maybe primary color, secondary color. You can give it a secondary color. So if you want to change this thing to red tomorrow, you just need to go to CSS. Just change the secondary color to be, say, red or green, and that's all. So if you are working on a large project, I highly recommend you stick to external CSS. But if you are working on a small project, well, yes, you can use inline CSS. Not bad rather. You can use inline CSS, right? But sometimes the issue with giving a one answer is that, for instance, now if you are working with a front-end framework, like, say, you are working with front-end framework, some of you might know, some of you might not know. A front-end framework, like, say, Vue.js, React.js, and so on. So they have ways you can style them, but like I mentioned, there is no one true answer. So what works here may not work, when you get somewhere else. You understand? But just know the difference, that whenever you are working with a large project, make sure you stick to external CSS. If you are working with a small project, you can easily make use of inline CSS or internal CSS. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah. So do you have any questions before I can give us the assignment? Okay, please move on with your question.
Okay, so you said that you attend to my question about images, HTML images at the end of the class.
I'm going to. I've not forgotten. So before we,
Okay,
is there any other question aside that? So I can give you what you should read on before our next class. So essentially, before our next class, I want to make sure. So if you take a look at these W3 schools, you can see, just as usual, go to each of the tab to see CSS comments, color, background colors, so you need to start playing with them. Links, tables, so there are a lot of things you need to start playing with them. But I recommend that once you get to once you are able to get up to this part, you are good. You may want to neglect this one, CSS advanced, CSS animations. You don't need them for now. You may ignore CSS advanced. Then you may want to go into this guy, which is CSS responsive, intro, viewport, grid view, images, So that's all you need as far as CSS is concerned for a beginner. So make sure you read everything from home to math functions. You may ignore advanced CSS. Then you can now move on to responsiveness. But if time permits you, hopefully, God's grace, in the next class, what we want to do by God's grace is to showcase the project we want to build. Like I mentioned, so the project is going to be a job application project. As a user, you'll be able to create accounts. Authentication, you need to log in, register, create an account, reset password. You can post job as a user, as a login user. Then, as a user, you can apply to jobs. Registration, authentication, sending emails to users, verifying accounts of users. But you need to be prepared. The back end is going to be in Python.